Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. All I ask is that you think.
What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, and welcome to this edition of the Just My 3 Cents podcast, a live interactive podcast where you can jump on and join me on hard conversations on race, sex, and culture. We specialize in nuance and we try to make it make sense. Very excited about the nuance in today's show. I think I'm going to go some places that we haven't went before. Hopefully some of you would join me. I have some Facebook posts that I'm going to share in reference to tonight's discussion, which is sensitive men, domestic violence, and love. Sensitive men, domestic violence, and love. A lot of you, if you've listened to the Mental Dialogue talk show, which I do every Saturday morning, which I've been doing for 7 years, it's an audio-only broadcast where our motto is all I ask is that you think. I always talk about in the past 7 years when I've touched, there's two subjects that when I touch, my listenership goes down. I don't get callers. I usually average a number of callers every Saturday morning, if you will. But the couple times that I don't get callers is anytime I talk about child sexual abuse or domestic violence, if you will, right? And when I first started out, I always do a few shows a year because it's an ongoing conversation that, in a sense, needs to be talked about. And again, we specialize in necessary and hard conversations on race, sex, and culture. So we will constantly revisit some angle of those shows. And now that I've been doing it for 7 years, I figured out we're still afraid to have this conversation. That's why the numbers come down, because it hits too close to home. And what I do understand, and I also respect this, for some people, their personal experience, a show like that can be triggering. So for somebody who's experienced some level of trauma where they don't want to talk about it or can't talk about it or they're not at that stage yet, that I get. So I do understand that that could play a role, if you will, in the avoidance of the discussion. But the reality is we've always swept these type of discussions under the rug within our community. And again, because we're willing to have these conversations, we're going to keep revisiting them. And tonight I wanted to revisit it from some specific angles that I haven't heard too much out there. And hopefully y'all will join in. I'll be sharing the Facebook post, or you can add comments and I'll try to read your comments as the show goes. Again, sensitive men, domestic violence, and love. That is tonight's discussion. And so, coming off the pandemic, we did a show and we know the domestic violence unfortunately increased mightily in a major way during the pandemic, as people were stuck inside and kind of stuck having to be with each other. We saw cases of domestic violence rise throughout the country. So again, it's an ongoing issue throughout the country, if you will, but specifically in the African American community. We don't like to air out our dirty laundry. And the reality is, if you've had this experience, typically it is too embarrassing to speak about it, if you will, right? And so I get it. But again, I hope some of y'all are willing to jump on. And the questions I asked right before this show, about 30 minutes before the show, is I wanted to find out, and I hope some parents would jump in and join me, but I wanted to find out what discussions are parents having with their children in reference to physical violence in intimate partner relationships. And I thought about my own life to a degree. I never really had a discussion at home, if you will. I think maybe in school it may have been visited, but more so I think in college. Prior to college, I don't remember ever really having the discussion. I feel like me growing up in the South, I culturally picked up on, in a sense, as a man, I should never put my hands on a woman. But when I think about my own life, that was never necessarily said to me by my grandfather, who I lived with until I was 8 years old, and definitely never said to me, in a sense, by my father. And again, that's not to say anything bad about them, but it was just me thinking about the night's discussion, saying, hey, there's some things out there, there's some angles and perspectives that I think are lacking, and that in my opinion, while we're seeing increased violence, specifically domestic violence, or necessarily not necessarily domestic violence, but more violence in intimate partner relationships. Again, not just the pandemic in a sense is the reason that it's on the rise, but I think it is prevalent due to, in my opinion, some values that have been lost that I think used to be, in a sense, part of the culture. Because again, I'll gladly say it. I've never put my, never hit a woman, if you will. Not something that I would do. But again, growing up in the Southern culture, I picked that up in the community, in the culture, as I just said, not specifically from home. And I think that doesn't happen as much today, in my opinion. But please jump on, correct me if I'm wrong, if you will. But I don't know if you'll pick it up in the culture the way that I was fortunate enough to pick that up. And I pride myself in the fact that I've never put my hands on a woman, if you will, and had a couple of incidents in my life in which women have put their hands on me, and it still wasn't my reaction based on what I culturally had picked up as a young man. So again, that's just kind of just giving some backdrop as we get into the context of what I think is why, in a sense, why it's not part of the culture as it was in mine. And I don't know if it was necessarily throughout the country. Like, I always talk about like in being growing up in the South and getting exposed to gangster rap, if you will. And it was very common for gangster rappers to talk about hitting a woman or whatever. Again, not something that was common or understood culturally within my community. And so as I moved around the country and visited different places, I realized that's why I say in the South, I kind of picked that up, the idea of, in a sense, being a gentleman, which didn't seem to resonate in other parts of the country. And so in a sense, eventually start seeing that all boys wasn't raised with that concept, if you will. And so it didn't seem to resonate other places. But here's the biggest thing that I think is missing, in my opinion, in today's culture when it comes to physical violence inside of our culture. We know that, again, it's on the rise. We also know that, if you will, more women are even transgressing, physical violence toward their partners, or at least more is being reported, if you will. It may have always been the case, but you really thought of domestic violence, in a sense, as a one gender issue often. That's how it was seen. As I was posting, this week, I think it was 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have been faced with physical violence. And for the most part, and when I was young, you didn't even address, in a sense, men. And the number, in a sense, to be honest, could be higher, because there's still this level of embarrassment, really, for anybody that's experienced it, that keeps people from necessarily reporting it, if you will. But I think even more so for men. So that number actually could be higher. But when I look at the numbers and study it, you see that, unfortunately, that women cases of being the aggressor is on the rise. And so I used to be, if anybody knows me, I'm a big time, I hustle to get my money. I'll do odd jobs here and there, whatever. And I was doing Uber, in a sense, years ago, before it was cool. I don't do Uber anymore. But I remember, specifically in reference to this discussion this evening, I remember from time to time, and it's weird how strangers will tell you things. I get being a taxi driver, right? Like having discussions with a taxi car driver, and me being an Uber driver, I recall sometimes, unfortunately, people would tell me about their situations. And I remember sometimes I would pick up these young ladies, and these young ladies would talk to me about the fact that they were fighting or they would be mentioning or talking about fighting their boyfriends. And I remember this, I never forget this one group. It was like a group of girls I picked up, like 3 or 4 girls I picked up. And it was like one of them started talking about fighting their boyfriend, and the other ones were all in cahoots and understood. And I'm like, you're fighting your boyfriend? Like that I kind of had to kind of inquire, because I'm thinking this makes no sense. And they're egging her on about fighting her boyfriend. And as I kind of, be a little nosy, and usually I don't do this, but in this situation I was curious. And so as I was inquiring about them fighting their boyfriend, comes to find out another one was like, yeah, I have too. And another one was saying that she would. And I was like, are you serious? And it made me remember and reminded, as I was coming up, that I started seeing, if you will, that even more women, if you will, were willing to get into physical altercations and didn't see anything wrong with it. As I was discussing with these young ladies, I was like, that's not okay. And they told me that it was okay because a couple of them were saying they could whoop their boyfriends. So since they was bad enough to, if you will, that's how they saw it in their eyes. Since they was bad enough to whoop their boyfriends, it was no stress. Because what I was saying to them, not only would, as a man, I would never put my hands on a woman, but absolutely women used to be in this situation. I said women used to be taught to never to put their hands on a man. And I says, in the situations, I can't imagine that your boyfriend is actually fighting you as he would another man. Again, I'm adamantly against anybody. I'm like Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg, if you remember that situation on The View, where she was like, nobody put their hands on nobody. I think that was in reference to the Ray Rice stuff in the NFL, right? And so so I'm with Whoopi Goldberg. Nobody put their hands on nobody. But as I was having this discussion with these young ladies saying, you shouldn't be doing it. And I says, if you're used to having these situations with your partner where y'all are fighting one another, and again, if somebody just jumped on, and so these young ladies felt like it was okay because they said they feel like they could whoop their boyfriend. So I guess really in a sense they didn't have that type of respect. And I'm saying to them, I says, well, even in this situation, I can't imagine, I don't know their boyfriend, but I said I can't imagine that your boyfriend is actually fighting you with the same amount of force that he would fight a man. This is too big of a risk. Again, I don't think you should be in a situation where y'all are. I don't know how much they were fighting, but the fact that they were talking about it on their own, I'm just a random guy driving them around, lets me know this was normal for them, right? This had been normalized, and I'm not naive to being in neighborhoods or even knowing, we, in a sense, if you live in certain neighborhoods, the couple that's kind of back and forth with their arguments and yelling, and sometimes it may get physical. You just kind of be slightly aware of it as a young man in certain neighborhoods. So I'm not naive to that reality. And then the whole neighborhood is always typically not certain what to do because they stay together even through that mess, right? And so unfortunately, that's another situation where, when that's happening, that it's normalized, right? And so as I'm having this discussion with these London ladies saying, I can't imagine that he's fighting you with the same force. You should never, ever be putting your hands. He should never put his hands on you. And you absolutely shouldn't be putting your hands on a man, because if he were to use his full force, that's too dangerous for you. They got out of my car like, nah, they good. And I'll be honest, I feel like I've met in my lifetime in this hip hop culture. I don't feel like women of the yesteryear felt this way. I feel like it is more a part of this culture where, in a sense, some of our trauma is, in a sense, that's been developed in this, if you will, hip hop thug culture that's been a part of our culture as we've grown up, if you will. It was, people always had respect for who was the baddest, the baddest, who could fight the best or whatever. I was a kid, I loved to fight. I was a smart kid. When I say love to fight, though, I didn't start nothing, but because I was a smart kid, got picked in, was in a lot of fights or whatever, and I was pretty athletic, and so I won a lot more than I lost, if you will, or whatever. And and as I got older, I hated fighting over stupid stuff. And so I really avoided fights as I was mature enough to get, in a sense, talk my way out of situations versus being quick to throw blows, if you will. But in the neighborhood, the guy that could fight the best was respected. And I remember remembering even the young girls, which wasn't many, who would fight. There was respect on the girl who could fight, if you will. And so I felt like that became more prevalent in our culture than it had been in past years, because something that was part of the culture in the past is women, generally speaking, not only were told to never put their hands on a man, if you will, but there was even discussions, for at least from what I've learned growing up in the South, there was even discussions for women, and they would even be careful, or should be careful, in how they spoke to a man. Now let's get to the sensitive man part, which we're about to walk into it now. So how they spoke to a man. There were certain ways that, in a sense, they could push up to a line, but they were taught there were certain ways that a woman shouldn't speak to a man. Like that was part of the culture. So in my hip hop culture, where we're bragging about which girl could fight the most, there was no respect in how men and women talk to one another. It became, unfortunately, as I've always said, within our culture, when it became commercially okay to refer to our women as a bitch, our whole culture lost. So men were being disrespectful in how they talk to women, and women would be disrespectful in how they talk to men. In the past, there was a level of respect that went both ways. Men were gentlemen and didn't like they might be speaking one way amongst the men, but if a woman came around, they would speak differently. So there was a level of respect afforded in even how they spoke to women, and vice versa. In a sense, women wouldn't try their men definitely in public. You just would not see that, right? Now that's common practice. So let me get to the sensitive men aspect. So a big part of why it was part of the culture, at least from my understanding of why women would be told, one, never put your hands on a man, and there's certain ways you shouldn't speak, is because men, our egos in general, one are huge to the extent that everything for us is about respect. That's how men move and posture amongst one another. Everything is about respect, right? And so what happens is, if a man is, you say, hey, you're his lady, or you're his wife, if you will. So there's a certain level of respect, that he needed to project to the public. So therefore, his wife couldn't be testing him in public, if you will, right? And amongst men, there's a certain level of respect that he's supposed to carry. If that looks bad in public, then he would lose some of that respect. Here's the other part when it comes to respect. So when it comes, ultimately, men, when they talk to each other, there's men can posture, even joke, like even cuss each other out in a way that there's a level of respect that's maintained, believe it or not. You'll see men kind of go back and forth, or be in the barbershop getting loud with each other, so loud that you think they about to fight, and then they actually be cool and be in the barbershop doing the same thing next week. Or sometimes whatever they're discussing could even get to a point where they relatively mad at each other. But the thing that trips off being mad is once a man crosses the line of feeling disrespected. And we know in this generation, unfortunately, disrespect for the younger generation could even lead to gunplay, right? But it's usually off of words. The words itself can unfortunately lead to a fight or gunplay for the younger generation. We know that to be the case, because what's happening is, when another knows a man is trying to be disrespectful, then he has to, by nature, figure out a way to address that disrespect. And quite often, when two men are going back and forth, when we're having the dialogue, we know when we've crossed that line. Like, we know when we've crossed the line of disrespecting another person. And so much so that in some situations, a man can be intentional in crossing that line. And he's intentional in crossing that line, expecting it to lead into possibly a physical altercation, or even further for, again, the younger generations where gunplay is common. Unfortunately, I wish that it wasn't common. But if you're understanding what I'm talking about, this dialogue between men is, you can when you've been disrespectful to the point where it may drive a man to actually, it's going to be addressed. It may be verbally at first, it could be physical after that, or it could be physical at first, just off of words. But as men, we know how to get on that line or to cross that line, right? And so we're fully aware that, unfortunately, this situation could lead to some type of physical situation. So the reason that matters, when you understand how men can be amongst one another, and this is partly why this was part of the value system of the past, when, again, amongst women, there were certain ways they would not talk. to a man and definitely would not hit a man because it's just too dangerous for men that are willing to be violent. Again, I was raised to never hit a woman, but I'm just talking about the physical part was it was just too dangerous and wasn't worth the risk for the men that are willing to be violent. And the other part is we always hear about how, in a sense, a woman can cut you with her tongue. So men that are willing to, in a sense, get into an intimate partner relationship, they may share with their lady certain things that they never share with anyone else. And so to a certain extent, if he's in a sense trusted this woman with this certain intimate thing that he shared with no one else, then his hope is and wish is that she will never use it against him. Now, for a gentleman or for a man who's also never would, harm a woman, if you will, if she in fact takes that one thing and says the very thing that he once told her or used that information against him, most of us will gladly walk away from the situation, but we're definitely devastated and hurt by the fact that she's using this against us or whatever. Or in the same situation where you're just having a dialogue back and forth and say it's gotten heated and kind of above the levels that it needs to get to. As I just said, amongst two men, there are certain lines we don't cross, or if we do, we know that this certain language or this certain thing will lead to physical to a physical confrontation. Well, a lot of women, unfortunately, in today's time, who have not been taught that value system of never put your hands on a man or don't speak to men a certain way. What happens in today's culture is, in a sense, since to a degree, she's not necessarily looking to create a physical altercation with the man, but by never being taught that, she will cross those verbal lines that we as men are fully aware of. If I cross this certain line, it may lead to a physical altercation. As a man, I could be intentional in that. I may be upset with this person for whatever reason. And, especially when I was a young man, and like I say, I used to like to fight when I was a kid, right? But to a degree, never was, like I say, personally, I was never the bully. But I'm just kind of pointing out that as a man, or when it was getting done to me, there were certain things that I would get into fights because this young boy would have crossed a certain line. Like for example, in the South, it could be as simple that I've gotten in fight for this silly shit. I could get in fight for simply something of talking about my mother. Like, you can't talk about a young man's mother, especially when that's his world, right? In literally, where the way I was raised, talking about someone's mother was fighting words. The only exception was yo mama jokes, which was just straight. We call it joning. I think it's all kind of names that it's called when people are kind of playing around and capping and having fun and just trying to get off the best jokes with one another. And so when it was so if it wasn't in the context of I'm just making this general yo mama joke just to do a yo mama joke, then that was the only way you could get away with saying the words yo mama. I've gotten in a fight twice in my life. I've been in 20 something fights in my, not counting my boxing career, right? I think maybe 20 fights. But I remember at least two was off of the words of yo mama. The young man that said it was wanting to provoke a physical altercation. So he crossed the line that he knew it is. So it was what was happening was the young man was crossing the line, testing me to go to your mama this, or, saying something they think they knew about my mother, or just being, just being disrespectful. So it's getting done in the moment to test to see what am I going to do, because it was understood in our country town that those are fighting words. So at that point, he's testing me, knowing it could turn into a physical altercation, but he's really trying to cap on me and basically see if I'm even willing to go there. But the young men that did this did it fully aware of that it could lead to that. And so that's exactly what it led to. And they took their L, you know what I'm saying, in both situations. They took their L, but in them offering it, like literally the whole neighborhood goes, oh, he said your mama. And again, it's a silly thing to actually get into a physical altercation for, but I'm highlighting that the full awareness that he knew it could lead to that. And so in today's culture, again, this is what does not happen. There's no language, if you will, that again, like Whoopi Goldberg said, nobody hit nobody. But if you're not getting taught, you should never be in that space because it's too risky as a woman, if you will, to be dialoguing with a man in a way and cross that line, because it's not okay for him to hit you. That's not what I'm saying. But I am explaining the difference between two men knowing they're crossing that line versus I would offer the young lady, because she, in a sense, probably believes that she can't physically hurt this man because she's been hurt. This is usually what's leading her to even talk this way. So she tries to hurt and cut with her words in the worst way that she can and cross all the lines that as men, we're so sensitive, we know we can't take. I remember one time was one of my brothers who's I think he's divorced now or whatever, but I remember him telling me that you won't believe how deep the things that your wife may say to you. He ended up divorcing this woman, but I just remember him saying you won't believe where they would go. And I had a couple friends that I was kind of knew their situations intimately, and I definitely remember another one of my friends, and I mean, I don't think they got physical in these situations that I'm aware of. You know, I don't know, but I remember specifically one of my friends' wife, like breaking something that was passed down from his father to him, and it was like very intimate for him. And you know, he had done something that hurt her, and she got to the point where she literally went to this thing that was a keepsake and sacred of his and broke it. Like that just made no sense to me, because amongst my boys over the years, eventually sometimes your partners will share certain things with you or whatever. Like I'll give you a simple example. Just again to show you the understanding that happens between men. And again, and I'm pointing out this nuance if it makes sense, because again, I think this is missing throughout the culture, just not teaching these things, if you will. And I'm hoping I'm gonna make this make sense as I wrap through this. I'm gonna start sharing some posts as well. I hope some of y'all jump on, man. I never want these to be 30 minutes of me just monologuing. I hope some making sense. You know, hit the link on Facebook, hit the link on YouTube, and jump on here and give us your 3 cents as well. And so I'll give you a simple example. A simple example is I love to curse or whatever, and one of my partners, we get together, we be cussing like sailors, if you will, or whatever. But we had one of our partners, for whatever reason, he never wants to be called motherfucker. It was like so unique because motherfucker, I'm just being a buck, right? He never wants to be called that word, and this is a cat we really cared about, who had our back through it all, and somebody I really cared about, and he made it known. He eventually explain why this mattered so much for him, and we as a whole group would learn to not stop saying the word specifically to our boy, because we understood that it bothered him. Whether we understood it personally or not did not matter. We just respected, of all the cuss words, this word mattered to him. And so I'm using this simple example to say that within family structures, quite often you see what I'm talking about carried out. You see, for example, a man and a woman, in a sense, not publicly have a display, which doesn't seem to be an issue today, whether it even just be an argument, if you will. But even seeing public arguments, I am always amazed at how they're talking to one another. Because as I said earlier, part of the culture was there are certain ways you didn't even talk around women. So that's much to your woman in such a negative way in a public manner. Now we'll see arguments and fights all over, hip hop, on love and hip hop and stuff like that. Let me go to these comments that I got earlier. I want to share these thoughts, because what I asked was, do parents talk about this stuff? Because I think most of our culture now, in my opinion, dysfunctionally just finds out about a situation, or your parents are really only able to address it once you've gotten in the situation. And sometimes based on by the time you share it, It's damn near too late, if you will. I don't know if there's enough discussions on this, but what I just said in the past was part of the culture. All right, here's when I asked those questions earlier. This is stuff I got on Facebook. I asked, parents. One brother, William House, said, "Yep, I did. No means no. Keep your hands to yourself, and men don't hit women." I asked him in return. I said, "Have you discussed if women strikes them first?" He has 2 sons, and he said, "Yep." He tells them to leave the situation. So good advice. Just wondering, all you sharing with your kids or discussing what if they're in this situation? Because in my opinion, I don't have children, but in my opinion, a lot of parents do believe if somebody hurts my child, I'm going to hurt them. So that's in your mind, but are you having the dialogue in the event that intimate partner relationship violence happens for your child? And as I said, what if your child's the aggressor? Here's another very pertinent post I want to share from Kat Johnson. She says, again, this is me asking, do you talk to your children about the possibilities of physical violence in an intimate partner relationship? Her response was this: I didn't at first because, one, it wasn't their business at the time. It was my personal business. And 2, the person who I was in an abusive relationship with is a different version of the man they know as their dad. It's like two totally different people, and I did not want to taint their vision of him. However, when they got older and already knew bits and pieces, I eventually put it all together for them and told them my truth. I have all boys, so it was touchy, but their dad had to stand in the paint about it because he did all those things that I told him he did. It was all true. He apologized to them, and it did impact them for a while, but they each had to work through their feelings with their dad. That was his problem to fix. Kat Johnson, thank you so much for sharing that situation. And I don't necessarily have any advice. I wish I had a therapist on. When I do my show on Saturdays, I typically would have on a therapist. If you heard at the beginning what I was saying, these are the shows that people kind of stay away from. I really was hoping somebody would be willing to pop on and hit the link that you see on Facebook. You can hit the link and join me. But that situation is real serious. Okay, we got a queen ready to jump on. Ashley, my queen, Ashley want to jump in on here with me. Let's get in this thing.
Hey, Montoya.
Hey, what's up? I'm on here monologuing for 30 minutes by myself. I hate that. People kind of jumping in and out, so I don't even know if I'm making any sense tonight. I don't know how much you caught, but I would love to get your 3 cents. I just shared a post, from there. I think their sister just saying that, hey, she kept it from her kids for a while and eventually shared it, with her sons, and they had to deal with it with their father. I know that could be very tricky within a family dynamic. Go ahead, Queen. Your thoughts about some of what I've been saying, or your thoughts about this in general?
So it definitely, I feel like it was a partial conversation for me growing up, like, just in terms of making sure I keep my hands to myself and just don't talk crazy to anybody because you just don't know what they're going to do. And that was kind of my experience with it. I don't think people are having those conversations with their kids now. There's just so much violence that there's no way anybody is having these conversations. I know like mental health is a major thing, and like with all of this isolation and like coming back together, people are still grieving and processing trauma from just COVID and that lack of socialization that they're not scared anymore. They're willing to take it into their own hands and be judge and jury. And so I don't know. It's just so unfortunate that people cannot respect autonomy and just letting someone be and not having to inflict any pain or control, and that's like not only the physical aspect, but even in how you talk to people, right? Like people say all the time, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And like if you're trying to intentionally be disrespectful or harmful, like why? Stop interacting with people.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I think you were giving some good game as a young lady when you said, I think that's exactly what the game you should be given. At the end of the day, young men should be taught never hit a woman, right? You know what I mean? And there's certain ways, that you you like, you may speak with amongst men, but you shouldn't speak to girl, ladies, certain ways or whatever. Like
Right.
the post I read from the brother who said, hey, he's taught his sons that again. So that's nice. He has as a father, he's teaching his sons that exact thing. I started to call this show something to the effect of why women should never hit men. Just trying to make it more controversial and bring people on. But part of the reason I wanted to consider that is because I mentioned earlier in the show of how I do see women now more willing to be physical or even think I can beat up a guy or whatever. But just the fact that it's gone that far, that's too big of a correction from maybe the past where women were in a sense seen him as docile and had to cower to men, if you will. But that's too far of a correction. I'll say in my opinion, but I know for a fact when I'm fortunate enough to have my daughter, I'm gonna teach her the same game you got. But the reason I teach the game, because had I named it, for example, why women should never hit men, which is a little controversial and it seems one-sided. But the reason I was willing to name it that is because while I'm gonna teach my daughter the same thing you learn. I'm gonna be that protective father, if you will, right? That's the plans for myself. I still give her that game because she may run into the young man who wasn't taught the right stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is, while I hope she's excellent at selecting decent men who would never transgress that upon her, right? I hope I can give her the game to where she's excellent at selecting. But
Right.
in the event that a guy is even more sensitive than the average brother, right? I talked about how men, we know when we cross the line to disrespect, and we know what come with that, right? But guys that are even more sensitive, sometimes they get riled up, and it ain't even that serious. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
And the guys who haven't been given no lessons on what masculinity looks like, what manhood looks like, they're the easiest to be slighted. It could just be the fact that she's challenged him, like he may have done something wrong, but the most violent men don't even accept the challenge, whether it's valid or not.
Yeah.
And so because I know that's a reality, that's why I have to give her the game. There's a certain way. I never want you speaking to a man. But it sounds sexist in today's terms, but it's the best game I can give her to protect her from the weakest men.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just a very delicate place to be as a woman, because I feel like, part of more women fighting is a trauma response, in that, like, if you don't have men in your life that are there to protect you or provide you that support, like, you have to do it for yourself. And it's unfortunate that our women are put in that position where they have to defend themselves. And I know, like, there's always outliers, right? So there are just some women that enjoy fighting. It has nothing to do with that. But I think that we're kind of in this state where, we see videos of, like, women changing their tires and the guys right there. Like, there's all these situations where women have to step up and know how to protect and defend themselves. And I also think from, like, the male perspective, that's also a trauma response. Like, you've witnessed someone, I would say, kind of like, to the extent of, like, you don't have the ability to communicate or look at things rationally, and, like, you feel like this is the way that it gets addressed. And, like, what other traumas have you experienced? What other things have you seen that tells you that that's the form of resolution that you use, or that you can or have that type of power over the opposite sex? Like, it's so unfortunate. I know, like, it occurs in same sex and all of that, but it's so unfortunate. And I think it really does come back to, like, these examples that we're setting, and to the point that you generally make, like, seeing that in the family structure and having that positive value system, and just seeing those positive interactions really teaches you, like, that's not the way that you handle things. There are ways that you can be able to communicate and have conflict resolution without it jumping to, I have to put my hands on somebody else.
No, absolutely. And so it's just like, since it is a trauma response, and since that is a reality, because like you mentioned the same sex, like when I was looking this up, the most cases of domestic violence now is lesbian relationships. So just looking this up through some numbers, right? So looking at those numbers, it's clearly about this trauma that we're speaking of that I think is a result of lack of family structures where these things have been normalized as how to respond. Again, we definitely know the history of even inside marriages with domestic violence was prevalent, and we also know the history of those. Because I like to make sure I'm being clear here, because nothing's extreme, if you will. So even highlighting that even the domestic violence that went on in the past, in a sense, still goes on even inside of marriages. There was always those studies that show, unfortunately, even those kids were unfortunately likely to repeat it or whatever. And so I don't want to, as much as I highlight marriage, I don't try to put it in this perfect box. You know what I mean? But as I'm pointing that out, that still ends up being relatively minority, because what's happening now with less family structures, there's more violence out there. And now it's happening more in boyfriend, girlfriend situations, or, live-in situations. Those numbers are well on the rise, while there's still, unfortunately, domestic violence that happens inside of, marriages as well. You know what I mean? But I'm just trying to walk through it and walk through the nuance that at the end of the day, seeing trauma response or never being told what's a proper way to act, sometimes you just get in the situation and don't quite know what to do. Like, I can admit that. Oh, go ahead, please jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, that's such a good point. And I feel like it extends even outside of like domestic violence. I feel like there's a certain level of grace that we have to give people that they may not have had experiences and don't know how to respond in situations. I mean, like, I think we see it all the time where people are very quick. I think this kind of goes into cancel culture, where people are very quick to write people off because they don't know things. But like, we don't have enough people emulating like what healthy interactions look like, how you can have these conversations. And so it just, unfortunately, what happens is in those instances when people don't know and you don't have those role models available, like, they're just going to continue that, and there's no way that any type of correction can happen. And it puts you in a position where like you are repeating the cycle because you don't know. And it's so unfortunate when we assume that people should have that knowledge. Like, that's just not going to be the case. And it's why we have to like clearly define things as much as possible when interacting with people, to try to see if we're on the same page, if we're going in the right direction. Like, what does honoring your partner look like? I'm sure there's going to be somebody that's, most people are going to deny that they would hit someone, but there are people that are bold out there to say it, and you can go ahead and weed through those people and like leave that alone.
Or the part of what I always have the hashtag for this. We try to make it make sense and raise the culture. So raising the culture to me is, okay, as much as I advocate for healthy marriages for children, say, hey, this is something that we need to return to, I understand that as a culture, specifically in our community, that's not really our reality. So my challenge is, it ain't like we're not still having these babies, though. We having these babies, right, whether we married or not, right? So since we're having these babies, then the challenge, in my opinion, to raise the culture is for parents to be willing to have these conversations so that their children, boy or girl, right, is not, in a sense, stuck in a situation. Because now that we know that the aggressor, now we're seeing the numbers go up, can go either way.
Right.
You can't, in a sense, just hope your child doesn't do it or isn't in it, which is, I think, was, as you said the conversations are not happening as much. You got some of that, but I don't think it's happening. Again, I'm not a parent. You're not a parent. But I don't think, after school program, I always say that I work with kids all the time. I don't know that these discussions are being had. And so that was part of the goal of this show, is to realize that the game has to be discussed with your children, because here's another aspect. So your child may react in a manner where they're actually the aggressor. Well, as a parent, your child is not volunteering that. Let's say that incident leads to some type of situation with the police or whatever. So your child's not going to volunteer that they were an aggressor or whatever. And because you're a child, you want to support your child and believe your child. So it's like to me, this is the nuance that has to be discussed now if we're not culturally raising people to not do these things, right?
Yeah.
So now we got to get into the nuance of what that discussion looks like. And so I get it. It's hard for a parent to necessarily, you feel me? It's natural to go, well, what did he do? What did she do? Right? And of course, when you're the aggressor and don't want to get in trouble, you're telling a version that maybe ain't all the way up the
Mm-hmm.
par. And so it's like without these dialogues, you're not warning your child, get out of this situation, right? And there's plenty of situations where we know that those who are aggressors who become repeat aggressors, they like control. They try to isolate you from your family. There's all these signs and things out there, but typically we're not sharing this until somebody's in the situation.
Right.
And then if you know about, if you like somebody like myself who's done plenty of shows on this, a lot of times when you've never been in a situation, we always think, why didn't she leave? Or, sometimes when it's the other way
Yeah.
around, why didn't he leave? Like that's the first thought because you haven't been in that situation or you know how to avoid it. Like everybody doesn't get in these situations, right? But
Right.
what we don't recognize, here's a real number, 73% of the violence happens at the point of leaving. At the point of leaving. So in the African American community, from ages 18 to 35, this is the number one way that sisters are maimed.
Wow.
This is the leading cause of violence and death for women 18 to 35. This is really a build up on the discussion we had just this past Saturday, right?
Yeah.
So it's the leading cause. And so I'm highlighting this because we're like we got this gender war where we get stuck in the words of look who she chose, look who he chose.
Right.
We're dropping it off right there. And this situation ain't simply who you chose because most of the violence take place at the point of leaving. So if you don't know that, you'll just be like, why don't she just leave? Why don't he just leave? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I'm just talking about the new one. Go ahead, Queen, jump in.
Yeah, I think that's the point where shame comes in, and like I think people really downplay the importance of creating a safe space for people to talk. I think it's just very prevalent within society today where people want to always chime in and add their experience, and like sometimes we have to be able to give people a safe space for them to start trusting us. And this might be, off on a tangent, but it just, I don't think that we create safe spaces for each other to have these conversations. Like this should not be a taboo conversation. This should not be a conversation that we're shying away from, because it can save your life. It can put you in a position where you move differently, where you select differently, just so that you are, okay. And so I just, it's so disappointing when we are scared to have some hard conversations because this is not a conversation that we should be afraid of. This is how we create awareness. This is how we prevent these things from happening. This is how, we change our community by having the conversation.
And that's the goal here. Make it make sense, raise the culture. I want to talk about some of my personal thoughts on the psychology of how this even happens. So we've already kind of agreed more than likely that our younger people are not getting enough information on this type of thing, right? Even though while it's the leading cause of death for Black women ages 18 to 35, right? Like this more than anything. So we got this reality. We both agreeing. Every time I do these shows, we agree we don't talk about them enough. And so I want to get into mental dialogue, the mental dialogue of the psychology of what's going on in our heads. And so from my observations, and this is what I would love to have a therapist, and hopefully one day I'll be able to ask a therapist this specifically. But I think, and again, I think this is where we help. We're having these babies anyway. So for anybody that hears this, I hope some of this dialogue makes sense and you share it with your children. Because again, like Ashley said, there's not this safe space. We don't talk about it. So it's almost like whatever's dangerous out there is out there for the culture as we speak. But it's not going to change if we don't talk to our babies, right? And so here's the psychology, in my opinion, of just watching the world and, me being a philosopher, if you will, sit back and watching. And so what I think leads to this things getting to this degree is, see, as a child, everything you love is yours. Think about from being a baby. So, if you're fortunate enough to, whether that's two parents or one parent or whoever's raising you, right? From an infant, basically, when you cry, you get it, whatever you want, because they got to take care of you. You can't take care of yourself. So everything you get is yours or whatever. And so, see, the Eggy Noodle says, what's the topic here? So we're discussing, just so you know, sensitive men, domestic violence, and love. So you see, you just jumped in. So hopefully, so we're getting into the psychology of why people attempt to possess one another. That's where I want to go, because that's what the unfortunate reality, right? Like, it's a long time, even if you're not the person who will transgress and hit someone, right? When you think about love, you have to be almost taught that love and possession are not the same thing. Because to a degree, as a child and as a baby, everything you love is yours.
Mm-hmm.
When you first get your toys, that's yours. Like I've even dated young, when I was younger, dated women with children or whatever. And so, maybe a woman finally gets comfortable enough to finally bring you around their children, right, or whatever. And so, in that first, young babies, quite often you sit next to the woman, they come sit in between you, because they're getting, because that's their mother is theirs. Like, that's how the child knows
Right.
she's divine, right? So think about this. So when your child gets 2 or 3, is basically typically when parents start teaching their children how to share. Because they're going to start interacting with other kids. You know what I mean? You teach your child to share toys and things of that nature, right? You have to be taught as a human how to share for the most part.
Right.
If you're not taught how to share, you end up being you can be a selfish person really all of your life to a degree, because no one's ever addressed or taught you how to share. Well, when you think about that which you love, and if you're never taught, like if you look up, like, love is not possessive. Like, we hear that eventually once we're older. But unfortunately for a lot of people, since what you love is yours, that's how we start saying my girlfriend, my boyfriend, right? And so when you go through your relationship and this person is yours, right? And so when this person who you've gotten intimate with and you have these amazing feelings for, you will harm them for hurting you in a way that you wouldn't harm somebody else for doing the exact same thing. It's because you actually think you possess this person. And love and possession are complete opposites. There's nothing about loving someone else that makes that person yours. But if you're never taught that, and you get any of these mental health things, I'll just use these terms for the sake of it, a narcissist and all these little terms or whatever. And so if you've never been taught that which you love is not yours, then you never lose sight that this person is not mine. And so some of these people will get to this stage for attempting to control their significant other, and they'll never stop doing it. They'll go to the next person, isolate that person, get them in control. And then now it becomes a control of doing what I want you to do. And so I'm just highlighting the important. This may sound like a simple analogy, but it's a lot of us never learn that love does not equal possession. We never learn it. And that's a dialogue that's worth having with your child throughout their lives, because it could help even with this dynamic. Because again, we're sending our children in the world not even talking about, well, what if physical abuse happens in your intimate partner relationship? Because it don't usually just jump off immediately, right? For those who are used to committing physical abuse, they usually have methodology for how they even get there or how it even happens. Now, you know what I mean? Now, unfortunately, sometimes I've seen it not happen all the way to somebody's married. I've heard of those situations. That's not usually the situation, but I've heard of those situations either. Usually there are signs, but people like that, they're the hardest to recognize, right? So there's all these signs. These are the dialogues we have to have with our children. But I'm saying starting with something as simple as teaching that which we love we don't possess. That what we like something as simple as that could 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 change the dynamic of think about being a teenager, right? And I'll tell me if I'm wrong. I'll put myself in a teenage girl's shoes for a second. I may get this wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. But you haven't been taught what I'm saying right now, right? And so you're 13, 14-year-old girl, and you're in high school, and everybody runs and tells you so-and-so was with this girl over the weekend, and you finally face that mug. You're so mad, you want to hit him. I'm saying that's a normal human reaction.
Yeah.
So because I'm highlighting that could be a normal human reaction, that's where back in the day, the culture of never put your hands on a man, never speak to a man a certain way, that culture has to play a role in her in that moment, not reacting her natural upset way. You have to have cultural values and cultural teaching that makes you handle that moment different than your natural reaction will want you to act out. And so in a culture where we're not teaching boys and girls this stuff anymore, some of this ain't the complete repeat offender of the narcissist running around abusing a bunch of people, even though those people will exist too, right? This is just a natural thing that, and let's say he's a bigger boyfriend, right? And he can kind of take her hits or whatever, and they get through it. This normalized. Mm-hmm. So now they become the young girls in my car when I was Ubering earlier in the show that it's okay to fight my boys. Like nobody ever taught them different. So I'm just trying to talk about how it can just happen because we're no longer having these values of young men. You don't speak to certain girls certain way, despite even despite the fact that rap musicians call them bitches every day, right? Like, because again, I'm not blaming rap music for any violence, and I'm not blaming it or whatever, but it don't help that becomes common within the language and that becomes commercialized. So it definitely don't help. But I'm not trying to, put the blame all on, hip hop in that sense. But I am highlighting, and I've always said this in, my upcoming book, Re-Education of the Negro. I've highlighted how would our culture ever understand how to consummate a family, a loving marriage, when nothing in our art emulates love, because that's what this culture is raised on. R&B ain't R&B no more,
right?
And I've always said, if you want to ever take a quick glance at I love history, right? And so if I go and look at the history of any culture, I want to look at their history. I always tell people the quickest way to figure out what's going on in the culture, if you ain't got time to study somebody's history, if you just is to go see what the comedians of the time are saying and what the poets are writing about. And in our age, the artists, the hip hop artists, are the poets to a degree, right? And so it will give you the quickest assessment of any culture at any given time. And so if aliens was to come to this country right now, come to this world right now and see what's happening in the art within our culture and what's being said, you still gonna see hip hop to a degree, talking about whatever police brutality to a degree, right? That's still in there. But like hip hop, like Steve Harvey said, hip hop don't talk about love no more. So how is a generation where their art that doesn't, because the art should express all the emotions, all the way from love, all the way to killing a person. That's art. It's just supposed to be art. But now R&B is just sex. Very little love.
Yeah.
And so I'm just pointing out that in a generation where we know this to be true, it becomes more imperative that our parents start going back to something that we were getting inside of the family, inside of the nuclear family, which was talk to your boys about being gentlemen. Talk to your girls about, like, I don't know did you catch when I was explaining an example of how men understand amongst each other when we're crossing the line that can lead to like I don't think girls of this generation have ever heard that. So, so while it seems sexist, that's a reality that, well, if I have a full understanding that if I say this, it could lead to a physical situation, then if I cross that line, at least I'm aware. But
Well, I think a lot of
imagine being a woman and a girl who has no idea, who thinks she can say anything. As men, we know we can't say anything to each other. Do you see what I'm talking about? Because that's, I always talk about one thing that we currently don't do in today's time is respect the gender differences that should be respected. Because we're trying to we try to put everything the same. That's not the same. Am I making sense? When I'm like, because of the men, we know. I want the young ladies to know. That's why my daughter will be taught, even when he's wrong, baby, walk away. Don't talk like that. Because again, the weak man is gonna hurt her. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean it makes sense. I think a lot of it comes from like one, we don't have
I know where it comes from. The dialogue is, do you understand the need to teach what I'm saying, considering you see what I'm saying? Because this, I mean, it is our reality, but I'm just kind of saying the dialogue of saying, here's a solution that used to be part of our solution, and without a nuclear family, we got to talk about what these solution looks like based on the reality. So you see what I'm saying? So I'm not asking the dialogue about where it comes from. I'm talking about, do you understand how this applies? And this is a gender difference that I think has to be respected.
Yeah, I mean I see it to a certain degree. I just think like sometimes what becomes frustrating is like it should be respect across the board. Like I get it. I do. I understand like physically, like for me growing up, it was like, don't ever put your hands on a man, right? You don't know what he's going to do. But I feel like it has to be.
Why would there ever be a but to that, Ashley? Why would there ever be a but to that?
Because what winds up happening, like when I hear this discussion, and the other side of this is like, and I know this happens on both sides, right? Like women are being violent towards men, but it becomes like, why is it, I guess like the other side of it, just to play devil's advocate, is like, why is it that I have to watch my tongue so that I don't get my ass beat?
I'll be glad to answer it. I'll be glad to answer it. Like because you're saying it as though there's no answer. The answer is simply this. If you're my daughter, Ashley, the answer is, I hope most men are like me, but I'm living the real world. So the answer to your question is, I know weak men that will harm you even if you're right. And that's enough of an answer. And you can't tell me as your father not to teach you any different.
I mean, nobody's not gonna tell you not to teach it, but
how is there a but? Like we're challenging something that has been this way throughout history. As far as
I get that. I get that. I do see that side, right? I'm in agreement. But there's the other side of me that's also like, why does it always have to be that way? I understand the answer.
Because of the difference. Because of the difference.
I understand the answer, but then it becomes
the answer is because of the difference. You see what I'm saying? Because of this is the difference that we don't want to respect, that leads to more women getting their ass jumped on. Because of these weak ass men. It sounds like I'm blaming the woman. I'm not blaming the woman. I'm talking about why that difference has to exist. Because good brothers have always put in provision to ensure that they protect their daughters and their wives from men who are dangerous. All our societies try to lock those men up every chance they get.
So, and I get that, but it just feels like there has to be some consideration given to the fact that like it's not the same anymore. And this is not to excuse the young women from like beating up guys, right? But like this is what it turns to, where women are having to defend themselves because like sometimes it is literally exhausting to be a woman. Like and I'm not negating what you're saying. I 100% agree with it. I feel like I'm a little bit more traditional because I do believe in gender roles to a certain degree, right? Like some of that stuff just makes sense to me just based on how I was raised and what I personally believe in. But it is just exhausting because it's like I have to monitor how I speak. Whereas if we taught respect for human beings, period, like it would not
But
be a
in the
matter.
meantime, it's exhausting for us that want to have provision to hear y'all say this when what you're talking about would never be the reality based on humans throughout the world. There is no point in which there wasn't men willing to harm you. So good men have stepped in and taught their daughters that thing. Why do you even want to be able to talk to a dude that way? Because again, within the gender, within ourselves, we know better. And when we do it, that's the expectation. So why wouldn't our women not know better? We know better. Y'all should know better. Ain't no why. But because I'm gonna give you, I saw this week. It always happens. Never fails that when I'm getting ready for a show, something happens on social media that fits what the hell I'm finna talk about. How about, I just saw this, I don't know when it happened, but I saw it this week. How about Jay Electronica, one of Erykah Badu's, baby fathers, if you know any history of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
How about, I don't know, I didn't look for when the tweet happened. I just saw it this week. So it could have happened this week or it might happen however long ago. I didn't look at the time frame, but I saw it preparing for this show. How about this pops up just a day and a half ago? It just happened across my social media line. Jay Electronica says, on this day, so many years ago, I was stabbed for some lady asking me a question in a tweet. So I don't know why he's doing it, but he's calling out Erykah Badu with this tweet. I don't know why he did it. Erykah Badu responds laughing, like bah, laughing. Now she didn't cut him, right? There's some other artist, female artist, says something like about her laughing, and his response was not to Erykah Badu, but to the other, or not as famous as Erykah Badu, but to this other artist. Why would you find it funny that she stabbed me? And whoever showed the tweet was saying, and this won't even be talked about. If this won't even be talked about, but if the roles were reversed, there would be no laughing. I hate the gender war, so I'm not flipping this just to create a gender war. But when you talk about the why, this has been the reality forever. The reality forever is BS that she could get away with it, but that ain't finna change either. It ain't finna change that when it does go the other way, less likely is there going to be an issue with the woman do it the other way because of the natural difference. The only reason Erykah Badu ain't thrown on the bus is because she was a woman that not only hit this man, cut this man to the point where she can laugh about it on social media. I'm not doing a gender war thing here. I'm just showing you how true.
No, I get that. I understand.
And it ain't ever changing, but we try to change it in today's time. So as exhausting as it is, Ashley, let us provide provision and you learn how not to talk to us in the same way that we already know not to talk to one another. That's the game we got to give our daughters. And we can't have our daughters pushing back. Well, why is it got to be that way? Because it ain't worth the risk, baby. You're going to make me have to go kill somebody.
I get that. I'm not negating what you're saying.
Me have to go kill somebody if you don't listen to what I'm telling you.
I'm not negating what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I have never not understood what you're saying. All I'm saying is that right now, both things feel very true to me.
How is both true? No, the only truth is the only one truth to this. It is no other truth.
But so to what you were just saying, right? Like if you have a daughter, like that's the game that you're gonna put her up on, right? So like,
why would would you tell me to tell her anything different?
No, I would not.
So boom, bottom, we done.
But also to that point, we like it gets left out to have these same conversations with our sons.
I've been saying throughout the whole time. See, you see that ain't true. This whole dialogue, I said.
All I'm saying.
No, you can't. But you just said you just said something that's not true. You go back and watch this video. Throughout this video, I've said this is what men shouldn't be talking in certain ways. I talked about how it became terrible when it became commercially viable to refer to our women as bitches. So I've consistently said this is what our men should be taught, and it typically happened in a family structure where you could see it, like I said, not ones where domestic violence were happening, right? But in the past, you would see it within the family and you would kind of learn it through example and via your father teaching you. So I've talked about that. So you can't say it's been left out when I'm highlighting, well, here it is, listen, when I'm highlighting this real life gender difference that I said doesn't get accepted in 2022. It doesn't get accepted verbalized when the tried true methodology has always worked and always made sense because of the reality of the difference. We hate this difference so much that we're like, well, why does it have to be that way? The reason it has to be that way is it's not men leaving it out of the conversation. But we know there are plenty of boys that are not going to get this training, especially right now. Like, let's be honest. There's plenty of boys who are not going to get this training. And so it ain't that society's leaving it out. We know for a fact that there are going to be some dangerous men. And so this is the best prep for the fact that even if we teach the boys to do it, these boys still will exist. And the society puts them in prison any chance they get. And here's the reality in our African-American community, and which makes it even more difficult for y'all. Let's put what I just said in context, because I don't want to say anything wrong. The unfortunate reality for our Black women is even calling the police, which I advocate for, hasn't always been okay for y'all. Right. So as much as highlighting that society would typically try to put these type of men away that are dangerous to you, I also know the reality in our community is sometimes y'all failure to reach out to the police is because of historical results. And so now, if you're listening to what I'm saying, it actually becomes even more imperative that our sisters listen to that old time teaching, because you don't always have the benefit of even the police helping you in a situation. So it becomes even more imperative. So it's not to ask why, it's to take the provision from the men who will gladly protect you. Why would I teach my daughter anything different? And you've already agreed. You wouldn't tell me to teach her anything different. So we would wait both. I know you wouldn't, but do you see that we will waste our time on the why? Let me just teach her what she needs. And it's hard to teach that in today's time, because that people are asking that why, or why you have more of these issues. Let's be honest. Let's be honest about that nuance. Like the the side of the thing that never gets talked about, the situation with Johnny Depp, like that can't, that again, everything every time I'm doing a show or whatever, this whole defamation thing or whatever, he wins that case or whatever, because the extreme flip side is how the reality is it can be used to your advantage. So that's the game you give your son. The game you give your son is the reason you should be a gentleman and should be this way, son, right? Is because look at the risks associated with it because of the gender difference. If somebody comes after your character, look at what's at risk. So that's me giving my son the proper game for reality versus trying to make everything equal. Because again, ideally, I'm not arguing with you about the fact that I would love for no men to be that way or no women to be aggressive like that. Like, who can argue that? but we don't live in that world. So that's why being honest about this difference when it comes to this dialogue matters so much. I hope I made sense, but I want to challenge the culture, because the first culture is have the conversations, but let's also be willing to accept that that's a level of provision that's not easily accepted in 2022, but it's still the best provision.
No, I understand. I still just feel both ways. That's all.
I ain't mad about you feeling both ways. I care about what actually works. Let me see what William said here. He says it's the ego. Let me show this to if it's a show. Oh, I can't show it and I can't read it. Oh, yeah, I can't read it all that way. Hold on, I'll show it after I read it. I don't know if he's still on or not. All right, hold on, I can't see it now.
It's the ego and emotion that make anyone think they have to respond to ignorance with aggression versus love. If we love ourselves, ideally, turn away from the ignorance shouldn't be a problem for anyone, but we do have those days.
Nah, real talk. Good information on William. Oh, let me bring up one other thing before we close the show too. It's one other thought I got earlier in the day, and this is something this is almost worth a whole nother subject. We won't go too deep in it, but Joy Hassan, she wrote this to me earlier before the show started. When she saw the topic, she said, "Interesting. I just recently did this with our 14-year-old. I honestly wonder how parents who utilize physical discipline with their children can effectively do this. It would seem confusing. So it's okay for dad and mom who love you, but not intimate partner who loves you too." Great dialogue.
Yeah,
Great
I mean,
dialogue.
I think it comes down to the fact that, like, I know you mentioned your points earlier, but for me, like, it just sounds like repressed anger, like you and oftentimes, like, what comes up is like anger is grief. There's something that you have not mourned, there's something that you have not let go. There's a child inside of you that is hurting, and this is how you're lashing out. You have not learned how to process and cope with your emotions. And like, we need to have conversations about that, because oftentimes people can only identify like 5 or 6 emotions. They don't know how to go into the I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, it's I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm okay, and there has to be some level of education and
Let
self-awareness
me ask you,
amongst
let me
ourselves.
ask you this though. What I want to ask you about her main point is the idea of if you are the type of parent that exacts discipline, like you whip your
Right.
children. She was just wondering how do parents who whoop their children, how do they get across to their children? Well, we do it because you love you. Is it not confusing for that child in their intimate relationship? She was I thought it was a fair thought that
Mm-hmm.
in saying it doesn't become even more difficult for those children to understand that my intimate partner who loves me shouldn't be able to hit me if you were raised with whippings. Now, I'll tell her personally, again, never put my hand, on a woman. And I was whipped a whole lot as a child. So culturally, I still was able to make that distinction, but it doesn't mean, me doesn't prove that it's
Right.
not an issue. So that's why I thought it was just something that was valid or worth bringing up. And I thought it was an excellent discussion. And I think I've seen, and I will say, having done shows on should we whoop children or not, and talking to more psychologists, where for years I was an advocate for it based on my own life, I've now come to see there's a lot of things that come from it, and this could be one of
Mm-hmm.
the very thing that she's talking about. So it's worth exploring. And now I'm not even an advocate, in the sense of spankings or whoopings as I used
Right.
to be just a few years ago, just from having enough dialogues on the regular show about it. But I just thought it was unique that's what she, when I told her I was doing this show, that's the insight she brought into it. She said she wonders how parents who do whip their children, how do they make that distinction? I don't know, but I thought it was worthy of exploring. Any
Yeah.
thoughts in that? Or do you think it's easy? Do you think it's easy for a child to make that distinction or not? I don't know. Again, I was able to, but me doesn't prove that it's easy or not. I don't know if, I never had any. I definitely, by the time I was in high school, I wanted to be a gentleman. So I just really rock with the men who, and, now, and I'll be honest, as I got older, based on when I knew men at certain times, I later found out they wasn't always what I thought they were, which happens
Right.
quite often when you're older, right? You get exposed to more of the family secrets and things of that nature, and those type of things are hidden from you at a certain age. So, it never made me change how I was, but some of the, but just what I saw as manhood and how they would protect women and that kind of thing. I learned from now. I know later in life, some of those same men that I learned from actually transgressed some physical violence, and I didn't know it when I was young. But again, just something that's worth throwing out there. I wanted to address her comment before we get off.
Yeah.
Now, good stuff. So thank you for jumping on with me, Queen. I'm gonna go ahead and I think I'm gonna end it here.
Okay.
Yep. William, you out there, brother? Anybody else want to jump on? We'll let y'all jump on before we go, because that's the goal, is to interact. I thank you so much, Ashley, because I definitely didn't want to talk for an hour by myself. I don't necessarily have a timeline on these things anymore, but I hope we've introduced some things that people should think about, because at the end of the day, as much as I would love to snap my finger and wave a wand and bring back healthy marriages immediately, because again, I think it would mightily help with this very issue that we're talking about. Okay, William he's about to jump on. Okay, so I want to hear his thoughts when he comes on. You want to stay on with him, or I don't want to take up too much of your time.
I'll probably jump off.
Okay, no problem. All right, William, I'm waiting on you, brother. If you want to jump on, give me a second. All right. So I got a brother trying to jump on. I was about to close this thing out, but I'm definitely willing to have these conversations. I hope y'all will subscribe to the page and share what we're doing, because we're, again, having the necessary conversations that are not always popular, that, we admit that our community quite often don't want to have. And so I hope that I brought some nuance to the table that should be considered, that you would share with your children, because you got to be having these conversations. It makes me think of another sister I was just talking to earlier this week, and her child's graduating or whatever, and she was kind of down on herself about, in a sense, her child, if you will, not being prepared for regular things and certain things in life. You feel like she wished she got a child up to speed on. And I was just telling her, to have some grace with herself, because I know she had done it by herself. And I'm highlighting that because quite often, even like this conversation, like figuring out when do you have this discussion, or if some of what I said tonight makes sense, and trying to figure out when you would have that conversation. It's difficult when there's two parents, if you will, to have these conversations. It's like it's hard to do even when there's two parents. And so I'm just kind of highlighting that to say it's so much to teach our children. I get how it becomes easy to skip past this type of conversation. We already don't want to have it, but I challenge our community to make sure you're not only having discussion about getting out of those situations, but teaching that love is not possessive. Love is not equal possession. When you really love someone, it's not that you own them or you can control them. And these are things that, if you're taught right from the start, you won't go into your situations assuming that this person has to do what you say, and doesn't trigger you to the point where it becomes physically violent and you don't know you're supposed to leave. And so, again, these are dialogues that I think we have to have, because in my opinion, we're not having enough of them. I'm not a parent, but in my assumption, I don't know that there are enough conversations about intimate partner relationship violence. And so we see it increasing. And so we got to have more conversations. All right, William, I gave you a second to jump on, brother. I don't know if you gonna make it, man, but I was just trying to stay on a little longer if you were jumping on. About to go ahead and end this thing. All right, y'all. I'm gonna have y'all hit the subscribe button and get out of this thing. Definitely share this with others. I always forget to say subscribe, so hopefully y'all will start subscribing to the page. Need more subscribers. Definitely need more people to share. All right, I'm out. Hope we made it make sense.